Shiva, you know you're paying the whole bill, right? If you travel for Shiva, you're paying for the wedding. There's no way around that. There's certain givens that given costs, you know you're going to have to incur if you're going to travel for Rosh Shiva. Okay, let's see the more about it. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel said, "Mekabel kiboilas." Mekabel kiboilas. What does that mean? Rashi says, "Litein melocha lenochri b'kiboilas." So you're allowed to give a goyish contractor a contract, b'toichat chum aser, even though he's allowed to do the work for you, but he's not allowed to do the work b'toichat chum. And Rashi says, "The yadi kula alma." Everybody's going to see no. And they're going to say, you think people are going to give you the benefit of the doubt? Everyone's going to say that you gave it to him to work on Shabbos. Correct. Rashi, Basil said in Perkama the Shabbos that you're allowed to give your kalim to a launderer on Erev Shabbos and Chashecha, even with Toichatchum. Rashi, no one could look into the laundry store and say, I recognize that's Chaim's shirt. No one's going to say that. But if you give your car to the mechanic, everyone says, oh, that's David's car. Or if it's building a house, that people will recognize. Because people could notice and see what it is. Okay. There are those who say that we're talking about here is only Avelis, but not on Shabbos and Yom Tov. That's the long touches. But let's see what it says over here. The Chosatchom will be mutter because no one sees it. So in addition to the problem of hiring a goy for Shabbos, there's also the problem of Marisayim. Now, the Mishabur says, which is Poshet, that you're allowed to contract with a goy, and therefore, even if he works on Shabbos, if it's not b'teichatchum, it's not a problem. That's only if your contract doesn't mandate that he work on Shabbos. For instance, if you give him a job and it's impossible for him to finish the job unless he works on Shabbos, that's going to be awesome. Amar Papa, and even if it is chostetchum, el deleka masa de mekabel also. It might not be in at Lawrence and Bathurst, but it's in Thornhill. So you say, Thornhill, no Jews live there. In Thornhill, Jews do live there. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to do it there either. If there's a Jewish community there where people are going to walk by and see it, also it's also.
Yeah, I know. Larry Wolf over from when we have a wolf rat hill.
Yeah, Zachar V'Shamar. His two dogs, and they were Zachar V'Shamar.
I know, but he told me one time he rented.
You have to speak up so they can hear it.
One time he rented out his trucks.
Right.
He rented out his trucks on a Shabbos, and he covered over with like a piece of paper, like taped on wolf iron metal.
Right.
And on Monday morning, we got 5-6 calls from different people in the trade.
We saw his truck.
Yeah, we saw your truck working on Saturday.
Wow. There's a plumber who sold his pickup truck to somebody, and it showed up with a machine gun in Afghanistan, and they saw it on the news. This plumber's truck, because they sold it out there and they didn't even take out the signs. So they were wondering why does guys, JP Plumbing from Pennsylvania has a machine gun on the back and they're shooting around in Afghanistan. He got the best marketing he could have ever gotten.
I was walking home once from school,
Right.
and my presidential truck drives by.
No, but it's very uncomfortable when that happens. So Amar B'Sharsha, B'chileka Masa the Mekabel Hasam. If there is no, even if there's no Jewish community around there, Nami Lo Yamar and Elba Shabbosos of Yom Tovim, Lo Shchich Inchi Da'azil Hashem. That's only on Shabbos and Yom Tov where people can't go there. But B'chol Shemoed, where people could drive around. The Shchich Inchi the Ozli the Ozil Hasam. There it's going to be Osir because later there'll be the same problem of Marsain. Mazut the Bereder of Nachman. Bonu le'apadna mekabel kaboilus chostotchum. He did it by the book. He wanted to build himself a palace, a gorgeous, gorgeous house. So he did it bikiboilus, and he did it chostotchum. So everything's right. Everything's right about it. Nevertheless, after his beautiful home was built, ikler apsafa v'rapuna barchimna v'le'alu legabei, and they did not want to go into this palace. They didn't want to go into the house. They wouldn't set foot into the house. That's a little bit insulting, right? But they held they couldn't go in. Even even Marzuta Raider of Nachman wouldn't walk into his own house because he realized he made a mistake. What's the problem? So he did it chos l'tchum. So why should there be a problem? So tomorrow Adam Choshev Shiny. And the Pashup Shani and Adam Choshev Shiny is an Adam Choshev, like Marzuta, brother of Nachman, should not have built the house chos l'tchum b'kaboilus, even though it's 100% mutter, because he's an Adam Choshev. But the Chedushi, I think the Sfas says that Adam Choshev Shani means an Adam Choshev, there's nothing wrong with that house, but an Adam Choshev shouldn't walk into that house. So Adam Choshev Shani is not going on the issue to build the house, it's going on walking into the house. But Pashup Shat, Adam Choshev Shani, they shouldn't have built the house. So Marzuta built a beautiful house and he wouldn't go into it. Dikadamri, Suyuya, Saya, Betivna, Bahadayu. There are those who learn that Reb Nachman or Marzuta, Reb Nachman, didn't just hire a subcontractor, but rather Rashi says, he provided them with the supplies. So it was more than just a standard kablonos. That makes it worse. And that's why they didn't want to go into it. That's why Marzuta wouldn't go into his own house. Abchamer Sharalahu, Lavungari, the Beiresh Galusa, the Me'evet Lahu Avidita, B'chayil Lebayada. Abchama allowed the Vungari, who worked in the house of the Reish Galusa, to do work on Cholamoid. And let's see, Rashi, what this means. Avungari are Misadir Shulchanos. They used to fear Tish. They were the people who feared Tish. They moved the tables around. They fixed the tables if they broke. He let them lemevid aviditayu. In Nishbar Shulchan Shori Lasakni. If one of the tables broke, he allowed them to fix it. Omari said, why is it allowed? Even the other loika shaku, since they're not getting paid, therefore sharshu yehuda kamashar. The less lamban, there's no problem. So let's see Rashi. What does this mean? They're not getting paid. Sharshuye revach ba'alma kedei sudosam the ka'achli badayu. They're hanging around in the house of the Reish Galusa, so they get to eat meals. If they're hanging around there, they get to eat their meals there. It's like when you go to the Rebbe, there's always serving meals there. You go to the Rebbe, you get to eat there. So that's why they're happy to do the work, but they're not doing the work directly for pay. V'loi kachashiv malacha, it's not kavanasa. Shashashuri means revach ba'alma. Just they're doing it because they're there, so they're helping out. Now there's a big shayla in the Rishonim. Are these Avungri Jews? Or are they not Jews? But they're definitely not getting paid, A. And another important factor is it has to be known that they're not getting paid. Because if they're not getting paid, but nobody knows it, you still have the problem of Marasayim. Tanu Rabbanon. Mekablin ki boilas b'moed la soishal achar moed. You're allowed to make a contracting deal on Chalamoid for after Yom Tov. So you're allowed to make a deal with a contractor that you're going to do this job for me after Yom Tov. But with the Moed also. But on Moed, it's going to be also. Rashi says, Mekabel kiboilis, noitnil nochi la soisa achar Moed. So you're allowed to give in your shoes to fix, provided that you tell the guy, you need to do this after Yom Tov. I don't want you to do it now. Do it after Yom Tov. The general rule that you could stick with, that would be a guide, is kol shu oisa. Anything that you could do, you're allowed to tell a guy to do. So you're allowed to do malacha after Yom Tov. You're allowed to tell a guy to do malacha after Yom Tov. And if you're something that you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to tell a guy to do that on your behalf. Tanya idach, we have a different price. Mekablin ki boilas b'moed la soisa la achamoed. You're allowed to be mekabel ki boilas b'moed. You're allowed to take upon a contract as long as the contract has to be fulfilled after the moed. Ubilvad shelo yimdoid v'shelo yishkoish v'shelo yishkoil v'shelo yimna kederach sho'oisa b'cha. As long as you don't start prepping the work. So imagine if someone wanted to buy an air conditioner from me, I wouldn't be able to go in and do a heat loss on this house and measure out the openings to see, to make my supply list. That you wouldn't be able to do on Chalamoid. But you're allowed to just make the deal to do this job after Yom. You're not allowed to cause an animal to mate on Chayil Moed. Rashi says, what is Marbin Behema? Mishum the Ovid Malacha b'Chayil Moed. That's called a Malacha. A Marbin, what is the action exactly? I'm sorry, we have to get into the nitty gritty. Ein Oichsen HaBehema Umavin Ala Zachar. You cannot hold down the Nekeva, obviously, and then bring a Zachar to it. That's what you're not allowed to do. K'yoytze just like you're not allowed to do this on Chalamoid, because it's a malacha, there are certain animals that you're not allowed to do a malacha with. A bechor, you're not allowed to do a malacha with. Psulei hamakdash and sheniftu, an animal that was a carbon, they got a mum, and you're paid it, you're only allowed to shechter and eat it. You're not allowed to do malacha with it. And you're not allowed to mate that animal. So, you're not allowed to cause a bechor to mate. There's actually a shaila, the malacha that's done during mating, it's a malach with the animal. Is it the male or is it the female? So if the male is psulei makdashim sheniftu, we know if it's a bechar for sure it's a male. But on the psulei makdashim sheniftu, is it a problem with the male or is it a problem with the female? But a bechar is a female, so vice versa it'd be a problem with the female. The bechar is a male, I mean. The bechar is a problem with the male. So the shaila is there also a problem with the female? A male you're not allowed to take to mate, but would you allow to mate a female? Because they intimidate them artificially. Look at that. Okay. So Zok the Gemara.
Weren't you supposed to bring that already as a korban? Are we talking about the behemoth a mum?
No, you were supposed to bring it as a korban, or even if it has a mum, you're not allowed to do a void with it. If it has a mum, it's shechter.
Right. So it's only an animal with a mum, because otherwise it's too young to be mated, right? Isn't it too young to be mated?
Nowadays, the barriers are breaking down. I'm not sure how old the animal has to be. When does an animal reach puberty? I'm not sure.
Well, different animals, different ages, but you're supposed to bring a bechor as a korban in the first year. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it can't be older. It has to be talking about a behemoth with a mum.
So maybe it's a behemoth that a mum that you kept alive.
Yeah.
Good point. It's a good point. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter.
General rule, by the way, is 1/5 of its life. However long an animal generally lives, the first fifth of his life.
Is that by humans as well? So what's 13 times 5? 85. It's 85 years old. Okay, you know, when you're on the beginning of the spectrum, it's not so scary. When you start getting to the end of the spectrum, it's not so comfortable anymore. Tanya Idach. We learned the bright. Ein marvin behema b'chol shemoed. You're not allowed to cause an animal to mate b'chol shemoed. Yehuda Omer chamoira shetova. What if there was a chamoira, female donkey that wasn't heat? Marbin ala zachar. You will bring a zachar to it. You know why? Because otherwise it's a dover havid. She's a woman. Once a woman gets rejected, that's it. She's not coming back. So Mamela, if you don't take advantage of that opportunity, you're going to lose an opportunity for the donkey to mate, and that's considered the dover of it. But the shar kol behemoths, other babies, you're not allowed to do anything. All you're allowed to do is machnis and oisain lebekorish. You can bring them in to the barns together, and what happens. You can create a raid, but you're not allowed to get involved.
If the animal's in heat, if the female's in heat, you don't have to hold it down.
That's correct.
So what do you mean it's mutter? You just let nature take its course.
Maybe it means you're allowed to bring the zachar there.
You're allowed to bring the zachar there.
Because the Gemara says later on. I mean,
but what kind of a malacha is? What kind of a malacha is that?
So they did a mavin ala zachar part.
Why is that such a? Why would that be a malacha?
I don't know. I would have to watch it on YouTube to see what's involved. But Vaisachas is considered a malacha.
I understood that the malacha was holding the female down.
That's why I brought up before that there's a shayla in the achronim. What is the malacha? Is the malacha what you're doing that you're mating the female, or is the malacha you're mating the male? But from the Gemara to Mashma, either one is considered a malacha. So you're asking
I understood from what you said earlier that the female was held down, and that's the malacha.
So what I said was from Rashi, and Rashi says that the malacha is in oichsin habehema, A, and B, umavina le'azacha. That's the Rashi of Ein Marbin.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the mating, how that works, but I know that there was a Yid who lived in Lakewood. He was Nebuchadnezzar for Tosh and Nisraf. The legend had it that his collar was shot under the chuppah by the Nazis, and he went crazy. His name was Moshe Abaye. He was like a homeless guy. He lived in the Lakewood dorm. They found his body 3 or 4 days after he was nifter in the dorm, because he lived in the dorm. He didn't come out of his room. So there was a cat giving birth in between the main medrash and the dining room. So someone asked him, Moshe Abba, make dart kicking? So he says, Avade, she started picking over us. So that's the Moshe Abba passed. He used to always say another thing. He says, we just learned Pashas B'Shalach. He used to always say, B'Shalach Parais Ham, lo Nuchem. Pavus ist Nuchem nicht rausgegangen von Mitzrayim. Weißt du, Pavus? Weil Nuchem gewinnt ein größer Gu und ein größer Ili. Und sie steht in der Gude, Ili haya Sham, loi haya Nigel. Tun Rabunen. Sagt er mal weiter. Ein Medairin, loi b'Shabbosos, v'loi b'Yamim Tovim. You're not allowed to be Medayer, not on Shabbos and not on Yom Tov, v'loi b'Chol Shomoy. Medayer means you bring in a group of animals, and the animals have input and they have output, and the output of the animals act as fertilizer. So you're not allowed to lead a flock of animals on your property so that they should fertilize it. Rashi is machnisin be'emel asada kidei sheyoytziu zevel u'mezavel nasada. Like they have bees to pollinate, they have animals come in to be mezavel sadas. That was a service that was done. So you're not allowed to do that. Loi b'Shabbosos, v'loi b'Yom Tovim, v'loi b'Chol Shomot. In Bo Me'eleh, if they came by themselves, mutter, and this means, let's say you have a nomad group of goyim who have their flock of animals and they move around. You have the Druzen, let's say, and they roam through your field. You don't have to throw them out of your field. But the Ein Messiah Noisam, you're not allowed to help them. And Rashi says Ein Messiah Noisam means lebehema love b'sada. They shouldn't help a behema enter the field. Or if they're goyim bringing their animals, Ein Messiah Lahem lasin mimokam l'mochem kidei shetizabel chos hada. You can't help them, guide them through your field to make sure that they cover all the areas. Even if they came by themselves, so they're not doing it for you. And you're not allowed to give them or sponsor for them a guard to help them watch their flock. You're not allowed to assist them. But what if it was Hoyaschir Shabbos? Means Rashi says they were rented for a full week. So therefore, it's their job to be mezabel the sada, not necessarily on Shabbos, but they work for the whole week. Or Shchir Chodesh, or Shchir Shana, or Shchir Shavua, which means for 7 years of a Shemitah cycle. So then they're really working for themselves because they're responsible to make sure all of the sadas have zevel on them properly, and therefore it's like a contract. They're working for themselves. So then Messiah Noisan, them you're allowed to help them. Rashi Ki'ilu Shal Dachamu. And you're allowed to give them a shomer. Rabbi Omer, and there's a shayla in the Rishonim, is Rabbi arguing on the above, or is he clarifying the above? So Rabbi says, B'Shabbos b'toiva, on Shabbos, you're not allowed to do anything for them. You could just say thank you very much. Or if someone else wants to help them and watch for them, you're not allowed to pay that somebody else. You just could say thank you very much. The Yom Tov Mezainis. On Yom Tov, if a guy wants to help them, or even you can give them mezainis, you can give them food. The Moed, on Chol Moed B'schar, you can even pay them. And on Rabbi Yosy Hilchos HaKarebi. So the shayla that comes up right off the bat is, what does it mean, the Yom Tov B'mezainis? You're not allowed to feed a guy on Yom Tov, because the halacha is, the reason why you're not allowed to give a guy food on Yom Tov, we learned it in the Seches, we learned in Abaye. Shema Yarba B'Shvila. You might cook more, you're not allowed to cook more for a guy on Yom Tov. So how can you cook here for a guy? So there's two approaches in the Achronim as to what happened here. One approach is that you give him mezainis, but you don't give it to them on Yom Tov. You give him cookies after Yom Tov. You give the snowplow cookies before he plows your field, not after he plows your field, after he plows your driveway. That was one shot. The other shot is if you have a goita in your house, so someone who's not the whole problem. You have a b'shvila, you'll have some illustrious goyish guest, and he'll want something, you'll cook it for him. But if it's someone who works for you, who's your eved or your employee, there you don't have that pressure, and there you'd be allowed to make food for them because we're not allowed to serve them because we're not worried you'll make something special for them. If they want it, you'll say, "I'm sorry, I cannot do it." If they're going to work on it on Shabbos, you'd have to ask a shayla. If they're going to work on it on Shabbos, you would have to ask a shayla if you're allowed to do that.
As long as there's enough time to
That's for the kablonis, but for the buyer sign, you have a problem. If I'll recognize your car on the hoist in Goodyear as I'm walking by Rainey and Bathurst to help me mashing the minion and Gare, so that's a problem because I might think that someone gave their car in on Shabbos. So you'd have to ask a shayla. I don't know if Marashain applies to a car at a mechanic. I'm not a person, but the only reason why I brought up the example of a car is because that's the example that Rabbi Rosner brought up in the shir that I was listening to. But if it's building your house, right, if you have a construction site, there for sure there's an issue of Marashain, I believe, even though I would never be choshed that you're going to hire a trade on Shabbos, right? But nevertheless, building a house for sure is an issue. Giving a car, I don't know. Right. Well, see, that's the problem. When it comes to building a house, sometimes, if it's something that you know it's for sure paid for by the job, without any doubt, such as laundry, which is what I was trying to say about laundry, why laundry is not a problem. I might see multi-shirts sitting in the window. So there's two reasons why you're allowed to give in a shirt Erev Shabbos, either because no one's going to recognize anyone's specific shirt, but the other shot is no one ever pays a dry cleaner by the hour. You're always paying a dry cleaner by the shirt. But building a house, sometimes there are employees that are paid by the hour, and therefore it's a problem. Mechanics, I don't think I guess most mechanics don't charge by the hour. They have got a job, or I'm not sure. So that's where there could be a problem. No. You ever notice how if a lawyer added up all the hours that he charged for, he must have lived for 4,000 years? Right, so they charge by hour. If they bill by hour, they don't have to charge by hour. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. There's flat rates as to what things are, and they can move faster. Okay, so let's see the Gemara back. Until now, we were discussing an oil crisis, right? We always talk about the oil crisis, but there's a wine crisis too. It's the same issues occurred. So you can bottle or barrel all your wines properly, differ Rabbi Yosy, like Rabbi Yosy says. Rabbi Yehuda, you only do something temporary, like cover it over with boards, so the wine shouldn't get spoiled. So it's interesting to note that in the last Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda was quoted first, and Rabbi Yosy was quoted second. And in this Mishnah, Rabbi Yosy is quoted first. So the Mefarshim tell us the reason why it's this way is because Mishnayos were originally Tar Shalafeh, and they were set over like sing-song, like poetry to help you remember it. So they decided that in the second Mishnah, since we're in the subject of Rabbi Yosy, on the first Mishnah, we'll pick up with Rabbi Yosy when we talk about Yayin, and then we'll go back to Rabbi Yosy. Why do I need the same halacha told to us both by oil as well as by wine? So if we only move this halacha by oil, there Rabbi Yosy allows you to process the oil fully because there's a great loss involved. From the Mishcha Nafesh Pseide. And Rashi says because oil is expensive and there's a greater loss if oil goes bad. But the Rashash says not necessarily that oil is more expensive, but oil spoils faster. But when it comes to wine, well, maybe the danger of loss isn't so high. Maybe Rabbi Yosy would agree with Rabbi Yehuda that you cannot take such measures to completely finish the process. He argues by wine as well. If we only do the halacha by wine, I would have said that he come Rabbi Yehuda. That Rabbi Yehuda limits what you're allowed to do. But by oil, where the peril is larger, oil could spoil. Yeah. When you say oil spoil, we don't mean the oil spoiling. We mean the olives that are already ready to give out the oil. If you don't process them, they will spoil. Once it's already oil, yeah, it doesn't flow. Amr Bitzur Bar Ava. Man Tana Shinu b'Moed. This is the Rabbi Yosy that we were talking about. Man Tana Shinu b'Moed b'Dover Ovid. Who is a Tana who holds that if you do a Dover Ovid, you have to do it with a Shinui? Zok Gemara, I don't know, but I know who it's not. The like Rabbi Yosy. The like Rabbi Yosy. It's not Rabbi Yosy. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Yosy are aligned. Rabbi Yosef, halacha Rabbi Yosy. Halacha like Rabbi Yosy. We pass like Rabbi Yosy that when it comes to Dover Ovid, you don't have to do it with the Shinui. We've spoken about oil. We've spoken about wine. What about beer? Are you allowed to be logo fachavus? Rashi teaches, are you allowed to smear and seal the top of the jug of beer on Cholamoid? Amalahu. So he answered back. So Rabbi Nachman answered back. Sinai Omar. Rabbi Yosef was called Sinai. Why was it called Sinai? Because he knew everything. He knew Kol HaTorah. And Sinai said, Halacha Rabbi Yosef, which means you don't have to do it with a shinu, so you should be allowed to do it. So maybe Rabbi Yosef only was mekel by wine. Maybe he would not have been mekel by beer. What is the reason why chamra is not allowed? Because it could lead to a large loss. Well, if that's the case, you have the same sorah shechanami ispa pseida, and therefore we should allow you to do it. Damar Abaye, Amrli Aim, and whenever Abaye quotes from his mother, it's not really his mother, it's the woman who raised him, because Abaye was a Yosem, and the word Abaye spells Asher Becha Yerucham Yosem, so it's in Abaye's name that he was a Yosem. And my mother used to tell me, Shish Savi Vishaya, you're better off with a smaller jug that's sealed mibar tamne, from a larger jug that can hold 8 units for loishaya, and it's not smeared. Why? Because if it's sealed, it's going to be much better. So you see that it's important to seal a jug of sheikhar, and therefore it should be mutter just like it is with wine. Amar Rab Chama bar Guri Amar Rav, Hilchas Moed Hilchas Kusim b'halacha. The halachas of Moed are just like halacha of Kusim. Now we know that Kusim, what's unique about Kusim is we don't know which mitzvahs they do and which ones they don't. The Gemara tells us whichever mitzvah we see they've taken on and they do it really well. Whichever mitzvah they haven't taken on, but it's hit and miss. We don't know what they've taken on and what not. And similarly, when it comes to Hilchas Moed, you can't really compare one to the next. It's hit and miss. I sort of gave away what the Gemara is going to say already in the future. What are we comparing? Hilchas Moed, Hilchas Kusim. They are akuras, they don't have children. In other words, you can't learn one from the other. Each thing you learn has to remain independent. Where do you see this idea? You're allowed to shmear, to seal up a small little jug, but you can't shmear a big jug. And Rav Dimi Minado said exactly the opposite. So you see two polar opposites with no rhyme or reason. But the reason is, the Mandama who held you're only allowed to seal up a larger jug is because a larger jug has greater quantity inside it. So if it goes bad, there'll be a greater loss. And the other Mandama was more worried about tircha. A larger jug is a bigger tircha to seal, and therefore he disallowed it. So you see there's sort of no rhyme or reason. There can be polar opposites. But the big kasha is that this halacha that we said you can't compare one to the next is quoted directly after we just compared sheikhar to yayin. We just said that sheikhar is also because it's like yayin, and a second later we said you can't do that by Hilchas Moed. So the Achronim say that you can't compare is similar items, but if it's mamish identical, then you could compare.
But these are 2 barrels here. We're talking about doing the exact same thing. It's just this different size.
One's a small one, one's a big one.
Yeah, but one's wine and one's oil. That seems
so you're arguing one's wine, so you're arguing that this is also similar. So
this
how do you
more
know
similar than the other thing?
I agree. I don't know how you can. I don't know how you can determine what's exactly alike that you could compare and what's not. So to me, this halacha of how to determine what's identical and what's not is also a kuros to me because I wouldn't know when to apply it. So I agree with your comment.
Basically, also the principle here. There's no principle here. The principle here is we're talking about the way, right? That's the whole story. But basically, here if it's wine or if it's oil, one plus together. Rather than principle.
I hear. Okay. Amar Abaye. Naktinon, we know Hilchas Moed, Hilchas Shabbos. Hilchas Moed is like Hilchas Shabbos. What do you mean? In what way are we comparing Hilchas Moed to Hilchas Shabbos? Yesh men pater avaloser. There are those that if you do it nishkeferlich, but lechatchila you shouldn't do it. And the yesh men muter lechatchila, and there are those things that are in Gansen muter lechatchila. And Rashi gives us an example. Even where we said in Zoipsin, whether it's a smaller jug or a larger jug, also we're not going to say that you're over an assay if you did it. Have a mutter they cut down his product from his field on Chalamoid. They cut down things from his field on Chalamoid. There's our age group grew up that whenever someone did something that was like a little from, they would call him a Katsky. Remember, Chaim boys would call you a Katsky. Anybody who did something that was from, you're a Katsky. You know where that came from? You don't remember our age? Everyone said you're such a Katsky. You know where that comes from? That comes from today is the yahrzeit of the Heliger of Menachem Mendel of Kotz. Menachem Mendel of Kotz won people to steig. Like he used to always say, you want to know where the Rebbeinu Shalom is? He's wherever you let him in. So he used to won. They say that the Baal Shem Tov was Chassidus to bring the Avos Hashem. He was the Rav Menachem of Kotz was din. He was a sharper guy, and in fact he was the Rebbe of Chiddush Harim. Like he brought the sharp guy. So the legend goes that there was a Rebbe in Eitz Chaim who would say over a sharper vertel from the Kotzke. So because of that, the Eitz Chaim boys, whenever they saw someone was too far from, they would call him a Katzki. Remember that, Shmuel? So it's his yahrzeit, and it's also, I believe, the yahrzeit of the Einikol of Rabbi Kiva Eger. Rabbi Kiva Eger has an Einikol of Rabbi Eger who became a chussid, and Rabbi Kiva Eger was very not happy about it at first. He was very not happy about it at first. He became a chussid of the Kotzker, and he became a Rebbe himself. And the Chiddush Harim said that those misnagdim who fight Chassidus L'Shem Shemayim, they have to get an oynish, but they're doing it L'Shem Shemayim, so it shouldn't be a bad oynish. So what is the oynish that Hashem gives them? That their children become Chassidim. That's what the Chiddush Harim said about Rav Leibel Eger. And it's also the Yeshiva of Manchester. It's also the Yeshiva of Manchester. Reb Segel, we read him about him in the comics this week, and he was miyasid. He was miyasid the cycle to learn Shmir Saloshim. Okay, and he used to say that's my passport to Gan Eden. Okay, let's see the Gemara Vayter. So Rav Huna, who was a wealthy guy, by the way, they cut his field down. So Rav Huna's own son asked him, Tati, how could you allow that they should harvest your field on Chalamoid? It says Teichen Kemach b'Moed, only the Tzarcha Moed, but for Shaloi Tzarcha Moed also. And this is a lot more. Dover she'avid b'Moed, muter la'soisa b'Moed. Dover she'ena avid b'Moed, also la'soisa. Dover she'ena avid b'Moed, also. Dover she'ena avid kama b'Moed also would be also. So this is so you might call it a Dover Ovid, because they'll get ruined if they stay in the field. But that's not true. Because when do you say that you could do work in a Dover Ovid, the Tlushim in a Karka, if it's Tolush from the Karka? This wheat that was Mechubel Karka, it wasn't wheat, I believe it was barley, we're soon going to see. This barley from Mechubel Karka, Afilu Kulo Ovid Osir, even if it's a Dover Ovid, you're not allowed to cut it down. And if you mamish don't have what to eat, then Koitzer, you're allowed to cut. You're allowed to gather the stalks together. Vidosh, you're allowed to thresh. Vizor, you're allowed to winnow. Ubar, you're allowed to select. V'tochen, you're allowed to grind. So you're allowed to do everything in Mainla Mayochel. Ulavach lo yodosh b'paris. As long as you don't thresh with animals, with cows. So Rabbi Bar Huna was telling to his father, this was mechuber. You're definitely not someone who you could say about you that you're Einla Mayochel because you're a gevir. So how did you allow your field to be harvested on Chalamoid? Omalei. So Rav Huna answered, Yechidahi. This shita that holds that it's also is a yachid. This shita that it's also the mechuber is the shita of a yachid. V'loy svir lo kavasi, and I don't hold like it. And I hold that since it's a davar ovid, you're allowed to cut down the field. The Tanya we learned, Klal Amar Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Mushum Rab Yosy, davar atolish min karka. If it's something that's disconnected from the karka, afilu miktsasei ovid mutter. Even if part of it will get ruined, it's going to be mutter. But v'mechubel karka afilu kula ovid osur. And I don't hold like Rabbi Yosy. I don't hold like that shita yachid, and therefore I hold that you're allowed to cut the field out. Frank the Gemara,
So the answer is good? He said a good answer? The Hulu?
that was Rav Huna's answer.
He's not a guy anymore. He's not back now he's back in the Moed.
Oh, I said guy?
Right.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't even notice what I was saying. Okay. Frank the Gemara, the Rabbi Yosy, Yadush Nami Beparas. If you're going to go according to Rabbi Yosy, where you're allowed to make a disha, if it's Ein Lamayoicha, and Rabbi Yosy holds that we learned on Amarav, Rabbi Yosy holds that when you're allowed to do a davar of it, you're allowed to do it kedarko. You don't have to do it with the shinui. So why did he say Vavachla Yadush Beparas? Tomorrow, Amar Bitzmar Abba, Man Tana Shinu B'Moyed B'Davar Abba Deloik Rabbi Yosy. So Abazoi, why did Rabbi Yosy say over here in our brisa? Because we're saying Rabbi Yosy is the time of our brisa that Vavachla Yadush Beparas. Amalach Hachanami Kivan Chol Yoima La Beparas Daishi. Since every other day they don't use paros to thresh, Ha'idnami Lav Shinu. It's not a shinu. So why shouldn't you do it? So Rashi says, because when you use paros, it makes a big koil rash gadol. Everybody hears about it, and then it's too public. But it has nothing to do with the shinu. Tanur Rabban. Teichnim b'moyed l'tzarech hamoyed. You're allowed to grind on Yom Tov l'tzarech Yom Tov. V'shaloi l'tzarech hamoyed also. Timtachan v'hoiser. What if you ground and you had extra? Harei mutter, that will be mutter. The same thing with kaitis and eitzim b'moyed. You're allowed to chop wood on the moed for firewood that you need l'tzarech hamoyed. But v'shaloi l'tzarech hamoyed also. In kaitis v'hoiser, if you cut and you had extra wood, harei mutter. The same with matin l'sheicha b'moyed. You're allowed to set up the hops to become beer on moed, only if it's l'tzarech hamoyed. But the shaloi l'tzarech hamoyed also. And hitl v'hoiser harei mutter. When you said don't bedavka put more, knowing that you're going to have extra, that you're not allowed to do. In fact, the Gemara Ramini, we learned that you are allowed to be married. It says matilin shecha b'moed l'tzarech hamoed v'shaloi l'tzarech hamoed aser echad shecha tamarim sayiv it's the beer of dates v'echad shecha sarim sayiv it's some barley ve'ava b'sheyesh lo even though you have beer marim b'shoyshim nachalosh you're allowed to make more beer that you don't need for Yom Tov, that you only need for after Yom Tov, but you'll drink from it on Yom Tov. So how could you say earlier the Brisa Shalo Yarim? Clearly it said you are allowed to be Marim. The Gemara Tanaihi, it's in fact it's a Machlokes Tanoim whether or not you're allowed to create a pretext to make more beer on Yom Tov. The Tanya Ein Marimin Bekach. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Marimin. So you see there's such a Machlokes. Rav Chotzel Lechatzel B'Chol Demoyed. Not only did Rav Huna have such a situation, Rav also allowed his field to be cut down on Chol Demoyed. Shama Shmuel heard about it. Ikbid, he was upset. Lema Shmuel ki chidas virlei. Are you going to say that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yosy? Because remember, Rav Huna said, I don't hold like Rabbi Yosy, like the Yochid. I hold them a lot of cut down the field because it's a davar of it, and if it's a davar of it, I'm allowed to cut down the field even though it's mechuber. It was only Rabbi Yosy who says that you can't cut down the davar of it if it's mechuber. So you can say that Shmuel is makban and Rav and he holds like the Yochid Rabbi Yosy. So Kmerloi chatz the chiti hava the lo have a pasuk. Barley, Rav Huna was dealing with barley. Barley, if it gets left without being harvested too long, the barley will get ruined. But wheat wouldn't get ruined. So therefore he told Shmuel told Rav, you had no right to cut the wheat down. It wasn't the davar of it. My time of so why did Rav harvest his wheat? So Rav was very poor. Rav was a person who had nothing to eat. So why was Shmuel upset at him? Shmuel didn't know. Shmuel knew that he didn't have what to eat. He wouldn't be back. He would have brought him food, right? Inami Adam Choshev Shiny, or Shmuel held, even if Rav didn't have what to eat, as a Adam Choshev, he shouldn't have cut that wheat down. Rabbi Yehuda Nesiya Nafik b'Chamrasa the Bedusha. Where am I up to? Rabbi Yehuda went out with Chumrasa the Medusha. He did two things. A is he went out with Chumrasa with the Medusha, which Rashi tells us was a signet ring. So it's a shaila of muksa. But Ashti Maya the Achim Kfela. And he drank water, the Achim Kfela Armo, he drank water that was heated up by Goyim, so the shaila of Bishul Shomer Rabami Ikbid. Rabami heard about it and he said, "Oh, you can't do this." I'm Rabbi Yosef, my time Ikbid. Why in the world would Rabami have been upset about what Yehuda Nesiya did? If it's because of the signet ring he walked out with, what time did we learn? He didn't carry it rishus l'shus, where it needs to be a takshit, otherwise it's carrying. He carried it within his chatzor, and you're allowed to do that. And and if it's because he drank water that was heated by goyim, anything that can be eaten raw, there's no problem with bishul nachum. So Zak Gemara, Adam Choshev Shiny. He held it. We didn't see it was Adam Choshev, and he should have been makbid even on these things, sign not to walk around with a signet ring, A, and B, is sign not to drink water that Goyim cooked up. Amar Katan Amarav. Koitet Adam Dekel b'Moed, you're allowed to cut down a palm tree on Chalamoid. Even though you don't even need the wood, you just need some sawdust. You're allowed to cut down the whole tree. But light Allah Abaye cursed such a thing, he held you wouldn't be allowed to. Rabashi Abaye, Abba, he owned a forest, Bishlanaya, in the city of Shlanaya. Also the Miktaya B'chol Moyada. And Rav Ashi went to cut down his forest that he had, and he did it on Chalamoid. Amalei Rav Shila Mishlanaya Rav Ashi, Rav Shila, who was from Shlanaya, told Rav Ashi, my daita, what are you doing? The Kamar Rav Chanano, Omarav, Koitich Adam Dekel B'Moyed, Abba B'Shein Tzarech El Nasar Shloi. You're following that shita from Rav Chanano? Halayit al Abaye. Abaye protested against it and cursed the guy who do something like that. So how could you do it? Amalei. So Rav Ashi answered, Lo Shamili, I didn't hear what Abaye protested. Kolomer Lo Severely, I disagree with Abaye. I hold that you're allowed to cut down. What happened? As he's cutting down, the metal of his axe fell off. Ishtamet Naga, it almost broke his leg, and there are those who learned he got injured. Once Rav Ashi got injured, he realized, you know what? Maybe I should have listened to Abaye. Shavke, he left it for Hadaras, and he came back after Yom Tov. He didn't want to go against Abaye because he realized that it's dangerous. If you do Shar Lameker Kisna, he allowed you to take cotton, ulamiktal kashusa, and to cut hops, which you make beer with, ulamek shumshami, and to uproot poppy seeds on Chalamoid. I understand. It can be used on Yom Tov, Rashi, just to cover over foods, like the Einim and Tamarim, you'd cover food with this flax. Kashusa, I understand why you would harvest hops on Chalamoid. You can do it for beer. Why would you be allowed to? What are you going to do with the poppy seeds? It's good for the seeds that you can make oil out of. He had a pardis, he had an orchard. The time came to harvest it on Chalamoid. Katve, he harvested it because he held that you were allowed to. What happened? Lashana next year, Shehuya Kula Almala Pardisayu. Why is the Adam Choshev shiny? This is the story why Adam Choshev shiny. Next year, all of the people who had pardesim that should have been harvested before Yom Tov, they said, hey, last year, Rabbi Yanai harvested his orchard on Chalamoid. We'll purposely leave our orchards to do on Chalamoid. It's a perfect activity for Chalamoid. Let's go apple picking, right? So everybody did it. Rabbi Yanai felt so guilty that he caused such a chilul after Rabbi Yanai la Pardisa Yahushata. That year, Rabbi Yanai was totally mafkir his parties because how guilty he felt that he caused such a chilul of Yom Tov. Okay, let's stop here, and the Mishnah will pick up of this Mishnah, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow. I'm sorry that I was late today.